hand and prepare you for the second speech in the class. So we heard back from the remaining partner speeches the end of last week and Monday and Wednesday. I want to, while I gave you the chance to offer verbal feedback right after you gave your speech, I want to talk about some of the general themes and patterns that I noticed in these speeches, both things that you all did well and things that I would encourage you to continue to work on across the board. And then we'll talk about the next speech assignment and some of the ideas about genre that'll help us to understand the expectations of this one. So your grades are all posted for the partner introduction speeches. They are out of 150 points or 15% of your grade, right? So we're not starting with a huge assignment. So if you have questions about the grade that you received, I am going to be turning in the remaining physical copies of the rubrics for those of you that spoke last class and don't have them yet. So it's out of 150 points. Let me know if you have any questions, right? I used the rubric to give you an overall score based on where you placed in those categories. One thing that I thought that people did really well in the partner introduction speeches were through the use of attention getters, right? A lot of you used, like, imagine you're on a tropical island, right? They would use vivid imagery, they would use an interesting fact, they use a detail that just got our attention, right? Think about it like you're reading a news headline. Typically, there's something that's getting our attention and getting us excited and interested if we're going to click the link, right? A good headline gets our attention, and in the same way, a good attention getter does a great job of setting the scene and getting us engaged for the rest of the speech. So I would encourage you to continue to work on including those really good attention getters because they help us to really capture the audience's attention. I also appreciated that everybody got through their speeches. I know it can be a little bit challenging and intimidating to get up if you're not a big fan of public speaking, but I did appreciate that everybody worked through it, even when there were issues with the outline or areas where you got a little bit off track. I felt like folks did a great job of recovering and continuing to move forward, right? The show must go on, and while I recognize for some of the other speeches that there might be more challenges or situations in the longer time where you're needing additional support to work through the speech, I do appreciate your continued effort to work through it because I think that it helps us, continue to see your work and helps make sure that we're like covering up to what extent we can any issues that come up in the speech, right? If there's a pause or transition or a point that you forgot in your speech, if you don't make a point of it, there's a good chance the audience won't notice either. And I like that there was a good inclusion of supporting details and information, right? You all did a good job of including information that was exciting, that was interesting, that got our attention about our partners. Part of why I like to do this as the first speech is because we're getting to know each other. And I think having that new information about our partners was really fun. So I hope that you enjoyed that. So the big thing that I encourage folks to work on as they gear up for the next speech is about timing, right? So the next speech is going to be 4 to 5 minutes, and you should be shooting when you practice to consistently get in about 4:30, right? Give or take. So a lot of speeches, the partner introductions were in the like 2:30 or 2:45 range, so a little bit under the speech minimum. And for the first speech, right, I wanted to be lenient and flexible about that. I know that folks are starting out and working on timing. So that wasn't something that was graded too harshly, but it is something I'm going to be looking at with a bit more scrutiny going forward. Right? So I encourage you to really practice your timing, practice your pacing. I have a few tips on how to do that. If you find that you're coming up short on time, there are things that we can do to expand out the content of the speech to help you to meet that minimum event. Another thing to continue to work on are conventions and style for the outline, right? I encourage you to print out your outline at least a day or two in advance for a couple of reasons. First of all, it helps avoid the scramble of trying to get your printed copy right before class. Second of all, it will also help because if you're looking at a printed copy, it's likely that you're able to better identify any spelling or convention issues. There were some problems with proper noun capitalization, lack of clauses between parts of a sentence. And then another thing I would look for is the use of substructure, right? So you have perhaps a body point, and then you use another indent to indicate a point under that. So I encourage you to continue to work on that. And as a reminder, right, the outline should be sort of sentences that form the headlines or kind of topic sentences of the speech, should not be a paragraph form, word for word of the speech. And then the last thing that I encourage you to work on, and we'll talk more about some tips on how to do this on Monday, is some of the verbal signposting and transition between points, right? Using a preview that explains the points that you're going to be covering in the speech and how you intend to cover those, and using a conclusion that summarizes the key points of your speech is an important thing that you can do in order to help your speech be effectively paced. So I encourage you to continue to work on that as well. Again, there were some more specific things that folks did well or needed to work on going forward, but those were some general trends that I noticed and things to really prioritize moving forward. When it comes to timing in particular, right, nailing timing, the constraints of a speech's timing can be really tricky. So the first and I think easiest way to help yourself get in the consistent time range that you want is to practice, right? Practice giving the speech, see what your time showed up as. You might even use something like the lap feature on your device to figure out how much time you spent on the introduction versus your body points, right? And you might find that as you're practicing it on your own or with friends, that you're giving the speech in the time range that's good, that you want. But when you get up to speak, it's a little bit shorter. Sometimes that's because we tend to speak more quickly when we're on stage and we're asked to give a speech because we're anxious, we feel like we're worried about the clock. So I encourage you perhaps to err on the side of a little bit on the longer end, so maybe around 4:45, because there's a good chance that you might speak a little bit more quickly once you're up. And also to recognize that and be willing to dial back your rate of delivery just a little bit when you speak. So if your speech is a one-to-one recitation of the outline, then you will be under time, right? Remember that the outline should not be the full content of the speech that you're talking about and giving in the speech itself, right? The outline is a starting point for your speech. The best way that I can compare that is if you're writing an essay, right? If you're writing an essay, you've got like an introduction and some body paragraphs. And typically your body paragraphs are going to start with a topic sentence that frames the rest of the paragraph and the ideas that you're going to cover, right? For this class, you could think about the topic sentence or the first sentence of the paragraph as a sentence in the outline, right? And then you might verbally give the rest of that paragraph, drawing kind of from your own background, giving that in an extemporaneous way and so on, right? So I encourage you to use the outline as a springboard to add on your content. Maybe you practice preparing ahead of time. Maybe the outline has a story or example that you're going to verbally share in the class. But again, if it's one-to-one, there's a good chance you're going to burn through it pretty quickly, and some of the details are going to be missing there. Consider the use of deeper content, right? Like stories, personal details, anecdotes, and so on. I'll be showing an example of a commencement speech today that I think does a good job of this. There's a good chance that if you find that you're coming up short on time, that there's more that you could share about specific stories or experiences. And a lot of the really strong speeches in this class did a great job of using those vivid details of telling us a story, putting us in the moment, and by using that time, I think filled in the 3 to 4 minutes really well. And then the last thing to consider is the quantity of body points that you have. I generally encourage people to use 2 body points. Maybe they talked about the past of the partner and then their present. But one thing that you can do going forward is to consider using 3 body points. So maybe in a celebratory speech, you use a historical framing and you talk past, present, future, right? You talk about your experiences before EOU, your time at EOU, and where you see yourself going after EOU. Right? So 3 body points can help as you're adding some of that content and detail. So you might consider how much content you have and if a 3rd point in your speech would help to better organize. So after last class, I went ahead and submitted the expectations and both the prompt as well as the speaking schedule for the celebratory speech. So we'll be talking a little bit more about celebratory speaking and some of the expectations there. So the celebratory speaking gives you 3 prompts with the caveat. So these 3 different prompts fit the definition of a celebratory genre. So we'll be talking about celebratory speaking, and then the last 2 speeches in the class will be the other 2 genres of persuasive and informative. So when you're scheduled to speak, you'll have a 45-minute speech that meets the selected prompt. I'll also ask you to develop and print out an outline before your speech. And then the outline this time should include in-text citations and a works cited list when you're drawing from outside material. So for example, if you're citing from like statistics about graduation at EOU, or information about the field that you're interested in, that should be included as a citation. And we'll be talking more ahead of this speech about ways that you can integrate the use of citations, both written and verbal, for a speech in the class. So there are three options that you have to choose from. You can choose any one of these three, but do not do more than one in your speech. You can pick the option that's the most exciting, that's the most interesting, and I don't need to know the option that you've selected locked in until you actually give the speech. So you have as much time as you need to decide between these options. So option number one, right, is that you have been selected as EOU's commencement speaker at the spring 2023 graduation. So congrats, you're the commencement speaker. You have a 4 to 5 minute speech in which you share your remarks to the graduating class, right? You should assume that you're speaking to an audience of EOU students, family, and faculty. If you've ever been to a graduation ceremony, right, you know what to expect from that group. And I'll be providing an example speech that I think does a good job of highlighting this genre, but offering reflection, guidance, and advice to the graduating class is what you should emphasize for this. So we'll be talking about some of the ways that effective celebratory speaking works. There's also a lot of examples online of things like commencement speeches or addresses that do a great job of showing this genre at play too. Option number two is a toast or roast to the year 2022, right? So if somebody is giving a toast or a roast to somebody, right, they're giving a speech that is designed toward that particular person, to highlight their accomplishments, to celebrate their success, or perhaps to make fun of or joke about that person, right? So you might have a lot of different opinions about the year 2022, so you're welcome to express those. Think about it as being like a dinner party with your guest 2022. And drawing from your own experiences, memorable moments, or examples, right? You can give a toast or roast. The last one is an example acceptance speech, right? So you've been selected to receive a prestigious $10,000 scholarship from EOU. If you want to add to that narrative, like maybe it's a particular type of scholarship, you're welcome to do that. And I'm asking you to give a 4 to 5 minute acceptance speech in which you share your gratitude, talk about what this award might mean to you, and talk about how you might use the scholarship. You could think about this as like an event, perhaps like an award ceremony or banquet that involves students, parents, and faculty, right? So I thought these options were kind of fun, but also did a great job of fitting in the celebratory genre. And here's my caveat. If you have an idea for a speech that fits in the celebratory genre and is not one of those three options, but is an option you're really interested in as we talk today about celebratory genre, before your speech, shoot me an email with your idea, your pitch. Let me know what you're thinking. And if I think it's a good idea and fits in the genre, then you're welcome to go forward on that. So you're welcome to pick one of those three options. But if you have an idea outside of those three options, it's really exciting to you, let me know, and I'm open to exploring that option too. So these options are also posted on Canvas to help you as you're preparing and thinking about which of these three to pursue. So I'm looking forward to these. I think they'll be a lot of fun. So I did my best to honor the Google form in addition to any changes or updates that were made. I think this should be on point to what you all shared if you resubmitted the Google form. So this time around, since the speech times are longer, we're going to have 4 different presentation days. And again, I posted the schedule on Canvas. Another thing you should know, right, is I intended to help rotate out speaking days. So if you were scheduled to speak early for partner speeches, then I moved you to speak later for this one and vice versa. So if you're still speaking at the earlier or later end for both speeches, you should expect to see that changed again as you gear up for the informative and persuasive speeches. Again, this is not ordered. I'll ask folks on their speaking day to write their names down on the whiteboard in their preferred order. So Lofa, Michaela, Tanya, Chris, Ella, and Alexander be on Friday. We have Annika, Cade, Devin, Olivia, Skylar, Ferris, and Jessica on Monday, February 6th. Wednesday, February 8th is Kenzie, Tucker, Natalie, Audrey, Luli, and Lizzie. And then Friday, February 10th is Chad, Austin, CJ, Kelly, Mary, and Noah. If you know that there is a conflict that impacts your ability to speak on that day, send me an email after class letting me know about that conflict so that we can help to reschedule and get all of that finalized. Otherwise, I look forward to hearing from this next round of speeches. What I would like you to do, now that we've had the chance to debrief the partner speech and give you some thoughts about the next speech, is to take some time on your own. This is part one of your attendance, and I'll be asking you to hand this in at the end of class. Take some time to note, first of all, what went well with your partner introduction speech? What were some of the things that you felt like you did really well that worked for this speech for you? What are two things that you want to work on improving for your next speech? Maybe it was verbal feedback that you received on your partner speech, or maybe it was things that were discussed earlier that you're thinking about, or things that you thought in the moment, oh, I wish I could have done this a little bit different. And then lastly, how will you implement these changes in your next speech, right? So you recognize, hey, I need to work on my timing. What are some things that I can do to work on that? So I'll give you some time to reflect on the partner speech and think about what we can do going forward. After that, we'll talk a little bit more about celebratory speech. Is Jessica here? There you are. Do you have a question? Elena May. Yes, there you are. We'll give you a couple more minutes to continue to think through this. Go ahead and finish your current thought or idea. I'm going to ask you to hang on to this because I'll be asking you to turn in part 2 for attendance in just a little bit. I hope this is useful for you as you're reflecting and thinking about moving ahead, some of the ways that you might prepare for this next speech. Again, preparation, thinking through what you should be doing going forward. Never hurts to start now. So I think it's useful for us to start by thinking about what genre is, and then where celebratory speaking fits within that genre, right? One way that we can think about genre is to think about music. So if you think about genres of music, we've got a lot of options, right? We've got pop, we've got punk, we've got rock, we've got rap, we've got, R&B, country. There's so many different options there, right? And when you hear music in a genre, for example, maybe you have a Spotify playlist where you're listening to a genre of music on Pandora, you have an expectation about what it is that you're going to be listening to, right? So if somebody is listening to pop music, well, what pop music is has changed over time, but we might expect like a kind of repetitive chorus. We might expect auto-tune. We might expect the use of a lot of synthetic instruments. We might expect very bright or perhaps enthusiastic vocals. There might be things that we expect when we hear pop music. When we hear country, right, we might expect to hear, guitar. We might expect to hear booming, kind of drawn out voices. We might expect kind of a range of topics that would be relevant to country music. All that to say that a genre, right, is a label that we give to something as a part of culture. We think about movies, right? Genre such as a thriller, mystery, sci-fi. You're looking for that headline so that you come in and have something that's meeting your need or expectations. I want to watch a silly rom-com, right? And your expectation is that it's not going to be this harrowing horror movie, right? So it's important for us to think about genre because genre is the set of expectations that our audience has about something. So when you're giving a speech, it's important that you're giving a speech consistent with what audiences hope for and are looking for. If you're asked to give an after dinner speech that's really funny, and it turns out to be this really like sad or upsetting speech, people are going to be frustrated. So speech genres are similarly expectations about particular speeches that are things that have been true all the way back to the Greeks, right? The ways that speech genres have played out have been a little bit different, but the fundamentals of them have stayed pretty solid. So the 3 major speech genres, and each of those is one of the speeches in this class, are going to be celebratory speeches, informative speeches, and persuasive speeches that differ in terms of their intent, their focus, and the ways that they use supporting material to make a point. And to correspond to those, we have what are known as epididactic, tricky word, forensic, and deliberative forms or expectations for a speech. And these directly correspond to each other. Celebratory goes to epididactic, informative goes to forensic, and deliberative goes to persuasive. So epididactic, right, or celebratory is the most common form that a speech takes. One way of thinking about this is to think about the present. Epididactic and celebratory speeches are designed to focus on praise or blame in the present. we are celebrating the graduating class, or we are condemning an act of violence, such as recent Half Moon Bay shooting, right? It's meant to amplify and reinforce our beliefs and our reactions in the present at that particular moment in time. How should we be feeling? We're feeling excited, we're feeling anxious, we're thinking about the future as we're setting up to graduate. We're feeling sad, we're feeling remorseful, we're trying to make sense of what the heck happened if someone close to us passed away and a eulogy is being delivered, right? That focus on the present, something like a commencement speech, graduation speech, and so on, would fit under this epididactic form. Forensic, right, is a focus on the past. What the heck happened? So if you're familiar with like crime procedurals, shows like Criminal Minds, Law and Order, right? Those are examples of forensic, trying to make a sense of what occurred, gathering the evidence and making a case. So we see this a lot in a legal sense, but we also see this in an informative sense. Perhaps somebody is sharing the history of a particular topic, talking about the history of oranges. That would be an example of using forensic communication to make sense of the past. If you think forensics investigation, right? Gathering information and evidence as to what transpired. And deliberative is about the future. One way of thinking about this is to think about deliberation. If a group enters deliberation, well, they're deciding what to do, right? So deliberative communication is trying to convince us to change something. The Oregon legislative session recently begun. A lot of lawmakers and policymakers are deliberating what should be done to address a lot of major issues in the state, such as homelessness, and developing a set of plans or policies to address that issue. Those types of speeches and presentations would be examples of deliberative. So again, these things correspond to each other. Celebratory speaking is epididactic, focused on the present. Informative speaking is forensic and focused on the past. And persuasive speaking is deliberative and focused on the future. We'll be moving down the line on these types of speeches in class. So now that we have a general understanding of form and genre, I think it's useful for us to talk about celebratory speaking to give you a sense of what to look for and what would be expected for this next speech, right? Celebratory speaking matters because there's a very good chance that if you haven't been asked to do so already, you will have to give this type of speech in your life, right? You might have to give a eulogy. You might have to give a toast at somebody's wedding, right? You might be asked to give a presentation in front of a group in a work setting. So we find ourselves saddled with this genre, oftentimes whether we like it or not. And so I think it's useful for us to develop a skill set that we can pull from wherever asked to give this type of speech. So there's a lot of different types of celebratory speaking that can be drawn into a few major categories, right? Speeches of recognition, speeches of praise or blame, speeches of inspiration and encouragement, or speeches mourning loss. And I'm going to go over these in a little bit of detail. Remember that you don't need to get these word for word. They're both in the book assignment for the chapter, and they're also, the slides are available for your review on campus. So an introduction speech, right? I am going to introduce so-and-so. Perhaps there is a guest speaker on the EOU campus, right? And that guest speaker is being introduced by a faculty member or other person on campus who is sharing a little bit about them, right? So an introduction speech is designed to help us become acclimated to somebody else who's about to be speaking. It's helping the person feel welcome, it's motivating them, right? And providing them with the springboard from which they can speak, right? A presentation speech is designed to honor or award somebody who is seen as being given a great accomplishment. For example, the Dalai Lama, right, was given a national commemoration and asked to deliver a speech. There's the trope we see in a lot of media where somebody gets an award or something exciting happens and the crowd starts chanting speech, 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 right? That would be an example of somebody being asked to accept an award. Sometimes we don't see this, right? People might choose not to accept an award for various reasons, like the Razzie Awards that are designed to award like a really bad film. That would be a presentation that people would choose not to accept typically. We will see a lot of acceptance speeches at the Oscars, right? Some of which are going to be great, others not so much. So we'll look at that a little bit. Acceptance speech, right? That would be receiving an award, which would be short and meant to express gratitude, what the award means to you and what you learned along the way. There are a lot of examples here of acceptance speeches that were much too long and got cut out, or there was frustration at the Golden Globes where they were using music to try to get people to stop speaking, right? So I don't know how many folks are fans of the video game series God of War, but there was an interesting case here of an acceptance speech. There was a voice acting award that was given to the actor who voiced Kratos. I'll post that one later, but he basically gave a very long-winded speech. Let's see if I can find it on YouTube. Oh, yeah. Yes. So this speech is about 12 minutes long, and I'm not going to ask you to hear this full speech.
Because women.
So he gets up, he gives the speech.
Whose belief that I would amount to something good would never waver, even though it looked like I never amounted to good. My brother, hero.
So
40.
very heartfelt.
Went to medical school and is now a doctor judge.
Very heartfelt and well-intentioned speech, but a lot of detail, right?
Level of enemy. Eric Williams and I are from such the same place, two different parts of the country, two different upbringings.
So while the content of this speech, right, is very good, is interesting, this speech is so long and it rambles and it jumps between points, so that for an acceptance speech and for the genre, it's not able to effectively fulfill that genre, right? And we see a lot of different examples of that. Again, I'm not going to go through the whole speech, but it's an example here of how a speech could lack good organizational structure and as a result, make it harder for people to engage, right? And that speech became a little bit of a meme due to how long and long-winded that speech ended up being. Speeches of praise or blame, right? Toasts or roasts that are generally expected to be cheerful, kind of fun. Roasts are tributes that take a little bit longer. A good example of this was White House Correspondents' Dinners, right? So back in the Obama years, there was a running gag where the comedian Keegan-Michael Key was serving as Obama's anger translator, where Obama would say something kind of with a straight face, and Keegan-Michael Key would be the person who was like angry and expressing his true thoughts beneath the surface. So it's an example of using humor and using levity as a way of helping us to kind of understand a situation, right? So it's making fun of him by like revealing his true feelings and thoughts. So speeches of information and encouragement, those can include things such as sermons that might come from a religious or a spiritual leader that are oftentimes calling upon texts. So if you're involved in a religious or spiritual group, there's a good chance that you hear some type of sermon or speech or demonstration, such as the late Pope, who was known for using public speaking as a way to kind of discuss religious beliefs. Jeremiad, right? So Jeremiad is essentially a kind of wake-up call of a speech, right? It is meant to discuss and portray things in a very pessimistic light. There are problems that are going on. There are things that are at issue right now. We need to step up and deal with that. Former President Ronald Reagan was an example of a speaker who used this genre, talking about issues impacting the economy, talking about issues related to crime, right? Portraying the nation in a very negative light as a way to call to action to address the issue. Or, if you are familiar with a coach who's given you a kind of pep talk, like you can do better than this, we've got to, do better in this next quarter type of speech, that would fit under this genre too. A lecture, right, is a more educational form. Generally, it's got a lot of crossover with informative speeches, but it's generally focused on educating and making people aware of things in the moment. A keynote speech is featured at a convention or a gathering place that is designed to get people thinking about or framing the rest of the event, highlighting the purpose or goal. So perhaps there's a keynote speech at something like new student orientation that was designed to help you think about how you're feeling at this event, right? Getting you excited, getting you interested in being a student at EOU, framing the speech through that type of presentation. A rally, right? So a while back, Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart did the Rally to Restore Sanity and or Fear, which was a comedic example of drawing together a group to talk about issues related to media misinformation. A rally is designed to be enthusiastic. It's generally designed to promote a social or political issue, right? A lot of candidates will hold rallies, will travel throughout the state or throughout the nation to give speeches at key places, to try to generate interest, to get people to show up to the polls and so on. Right? So a rally is really designed to get people's attention and to get people excited. A commencement speech, again, is inspirational. It's designed to deliver to graduating students. It's using energy and ending on a high note as a way of really trying to help us get thinking about the moment. I'm going to have us look at an example commencement speech or two a little bit more next class, since I do want to give a good amount of time for us to look into that. So I'll push that back to next week. But I do encourage you to perhaps start to look at example commencement speeches if this is the option of the three that you find to be especially interesting, right? Being focused on the moment, focusing on inspiring and really capturing the feelings that we do and should have as we're graduating and preparing to move on. That would be what we would expect in something like a commencement speech. Then we have a eulogy, right? A eulogy is honoring the dead, reflecting on mortality, and reconstructing the community. So, for instance, there were a lot of eulogies that were given following the death of actor Chadwick Boseman, right? Talking about his legacy, his impact, the way that, his character of Black Panther and his background was inspirational to a lot of different people, reflecting on the person, their history, the moment, and how the heck we move on from that person. It's something that we could think about, right? If Austin Butler wins Best Actor at the Oscars, you can probably guess that he will provide a eulogy to Elvis's daughter, who recently passed away. So what I'd like you to do in the remaining 5 minutes that we have is to return to your attendance activity for part 2. Of those 3 options of a possible celebratory speech, which of those 3 options in the moment is the most interesting to you? Or if there's an option outside of those 3 you're interested in, think about that. This does not bind you to any of those 3. I'm just asking you to start to think about these options and what stands out to you. After that, how might you use the celebratory genre to begin developing this speech? So how might you use it to organize, to give supporting content, to focus on mood and energy? I'm going to ask you to take some time to think a little bit about both the speech option you're interested in and how the genre might assist you in developing that speech. So how might the celebratory genre be used to help you develop the speech? So how might you use, for instance, supporting material or mood as a way of matching up your speech with the expectations of the genre? take some time to finish your current thought or idea here. So today, we took some time to talk about the partner introduction speech, some of the things that I noticed, some things that went well, and areas to continue working. Talked a little bit about genre, and then some of the expectations of celebratory speaking as one of those three types of genres. Next week, we'll be focusing on ways to improve upon the development of a speech, like introductions, transitions, outlines. We'll be looking at more examples of the celebratory genre as well to help prepare you for the speech. Once you have passed forward or emailed me your attendance prompt for the day, you're free to go. Have a great Friday, have a great weekend, and I will see you all again next week. Again, email me if you have any conflict with your scheduled speaking time, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Because I feel like it's like it's. It's gonna be like.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Mary. Thanks, Alexa. Great, thanks. Perfect, thanks. All right.